By now you all know that I was born and grew up in Florida. But when I was 9 years old, we moved to a place called Carmel, Indiana, just north of Indianapolis. And it was during this time that I entered my teenage years. I homeschooled for many of those years, but I ended up going to Carmel Public High School as well. Of course, like any angsty teenager does, I thought that the place that I lived was the lamest place on the planet. You see, Indiana, like Wisconsin, is very flat and full of farmland, and it was crushingly boring and normal to me. Now, me and my friends that I hung out with during my time there didn't always make the best decisions, but it was always in the name of trying to create our own excitement and make the best out of our situation. However, it was while I was living in Carmel, Indiana, that I ended up being called by God, realizing my purpose in life, and later on I ended up going to school and being called to full-time ministry as a pastor. Interestingly enough, years later I was studying at the seminary and I was taking a class on church marketing. And we were reading this book that was talking about all sorts of good examples of marketing that churches had done, that products had done, and even that different cities had done to entice people to come live in them. And it was talking about the best city to live in the country. And interestingly enough, as I read there in the book, it said Carmel, Indiana. Now I was surprised and shocked, and I remembered Carmel being so boring, but I went to Google and looked it up, and apparently, yes, for many years running, it has been considered to be one of the best places in the country to live. I checked on this with my parents, and they confirmed that was one of the reasons that we lived there. In fact, my dad even spent an hour each way every day commuting to and from work so that we could live in Carmel, Indiana. And my parents also informed me at that time that the public high school I went to is considered one of the best public high schools in the country. So as I was looking at my situation as an angsty teenager, I never would have known it, but I was living in a place that was a lot more special than I realized. It turns out a lot of times the way that we view reality is actually quite wrong. A couple of years ago, my wife and I went on a trip with the Wisconsin Conference to go and visit Israel. Now we were very excited, obviously, and the expectation is that you're going to see lots of places that you've read about in the Bible and see them come to life. And we did. Some of the high points for us were going to the Valley of Elah, where David fought Goliath. We went to Jerusalem and saw the Temple Mount. We went and sailed on the Sea of Galilee, where Jesus walked on the water. And it was just so wonderful to be able to see some of these sights in person. Now, of course, there's this initial feeling of magic, like you're walking through some sort of fairy tale. But the more that we looked around and kind of saw the actual situation in front of us, the more we realized that Israel is incredibly normal. There's poverty, there's crime, there's military present all the time in case there's an attack. There's old ruins, yes, but they're right next to large, bustling modern cities with modern problems. And for every holy site that we saw, there were about 10,000 little tourist shops trying to capitalize on people like us who were just trying to reconnect with the Bible stories. And so looking at it, after a couple of days, we realized, man, this is just so crushingly ordinary and normal to be here and to look at it. I remember there was one specific point where we were in the Valley of Elah, and I stooped down at the brook to pick out 5 smooth stones, emulating King David. And I looked up and I looked all around at the field surrounding us, and it was this ordinary, boring, muddy field. And I might as well have just been in Indiana. You know, it was nothing special, it was nothing magical. And I wondered how many angsty teenagers grew up right next to this field where all of these Bible stories happened in the midst of all of this history, and just felt nothing for it and just felt like it was the most boring place in the world, just like I did when I was growing up. But then a thought came to me. Jesus was born in the middle of that. Jesus was not born on another planet. He was not born in a sparkly palace. He was not born at a theme park with lots of exciting rides, right? He was born in one of the most crushingly normal and boring and ordinary places in the world, which is Bethlehem. And we saw it with our own eyes. And I can tell you firsthand, it was really nothing special except for the fact that we knew Jesus was born there. Now, later on, Jesus and his family moved to Nazareth. And the same thing there. We saw it with our own eyes. Just a very normal looking place, right? Nazareth is just a regular city. It's got pigeons and people begging for money. It's got lots of storefronts with people bustling and walking all over the place, right? There are gas stations, there are bus stops. It's utterly normal. The only thing that's abnormal about Nazareth is this giant church that's a testament to the fact that Jesus grew up there, and statues of Mary all over that have been rubbed and prayed on to the point where their hands are basically missing. Jesus didn't grow up anywhere special. John 1:14 tells us that the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And what that means is that Jesus was born into an ordinary life, into an ordinary town. And he was so ordinary as a person, he had to grow up from being a baby to being a man, just like anyone else. He had to use the bathroom and wash up, just like anyone else. He had to navigate relationships with his family and his friends, just like anyone else. And he lost friends and family to death, just like anyone else. In many ways, Jesus was just an ordinary and normal person. But here's the thing that I hope you take away from this sermon. The word normal, it doesn't mean anything. It's made up. The dictionary definition of normal is the usual, average, or typical state or condition. Normalcy as a behavior is defined as the most consistent or common behavior for a person. So at best, the idea of something being normal is very subjective and depends on how you look at things. But more realistically, when we call something normal, we actually want control over it. We want to call something normal and subject it to our power. This is how you are, so be that way, right? When you tell your kids to act normal, that means act the way that we want you to act. But truthfully, power and control over something is nothing more than an illusion in our head if we think that we can control it by calling it normal. For me as a young person, normal was a negative thing. Right? I lived in a place that I considered so normal. I wanted more excitement in my life. I wanted to get away from things being so normal. Now at this place that I'm at in my 30s, things have changed so much for me. I've had so much excitement that I could really use a little bit more of a routine, a little bit more normalcy in my life. But as the year 2020 has showed us, even the most normal places, and I would consider southeastern Wisconsin or really wherever it is that you live, to be pretty middle of the road normal. Even in the most normal places, we can experience some pretty abnormal things, and we have experienced them this year. And yet, life goes on, right? Life for us here has changed with every new generation. People are looking for a new normal now, but they've always looked for a new normal. Back in the day, Midwestern cities like Milwaukee and Racine and Kenosha and this whole area were known for their industry. We produced all sorts of things like machinery and cars and chemicals, right? We were known for being a part of the world that was on the rise, but then industry slowed down, factories closed, manufacturers left town, and people were left without jobs. And the new normal was that many decades since we've been known as the Rust Belt. So even if normal can correctly be defined as the usual, average, or typical condition, it isn't that way for long, and it isn't that way for everyone all at the same time. Nathanael was sure that he knew what normal was. Nathanael was from Cana, but he was living in Galilee. He was a fisherman along with Peter and Andrew and Philip. And we don't hear a lot about Nathanael outside of a couple of mentions in the book of John. But many do associate him as being the same person as the Apostle Bartholomew, as mentioned in the other Gospels. And this is because of circumstantial evidence and the fact that they're never in the same place at the same time. But it's interesting to think that Nathanael and Bartholomew could be the same person, just being mentioned by different names in different circumstances. This is certainly the case for Peter, who sometimes is known by Peter, sometimes as Simon Peter, and then sometimes as Cephas. So it's not unprecedented for this to be the case for these characters in the Bible. Either way, whether Nathanael is Bartholomew or not, He ends up being a follower of Jesus who is there throughout Jesus' ministry and among the other disciples throughout his ministry. And even though he later is a believer, initially he is skeptical. We read in John chapter 1, verses 43 through 51, "The next day Jesus decided to go to Galilee. He found Philip and said to him, 'Follow me.' Now Philip was from Bethsaida, the city of Andrew and Peter. Philip found Nathanael and said to him, 'We have found him of whom Moses in the law and also the prophets wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph.' Nathanael said to him, 'Can anything good come out of Nazareth?' For Nathanael, normalcy determined that Nazareth was not a good place. Of course, for many in those days, their thoughts about who the Messiah was were wrong. They thought that the Messiah would be this powerful, charismatic figure who would one day rise up with an army to defeat the Roman Empire and free the Jewish people so that Jerusalem could once again be God's holy city on the earth. That was entirely wrong, as the Bible made it clear before the birth and as it tells the story after the birth of Jesus, that he would be born humbly to a virgin in the land of Bethlehem, and that he would be a suffering servant, someone who humbly fulfills his mission and then dies to save the lives of the world. Right? This is not a warlord, this is a suffering servant. And so Nathanael's whole concept of reality is wrong, as is his concept of what is and is not normal. God was growing hope in Nathanael's own backyard, and Nathanael never noticed it. The most amazing gift the world would ever receive was about to be given to him, and all he could do was be cynical and joke about how those people over in Nazareth were not good people. He was about to realize how abnormal his situation really was. Philip said to him, "Come and see." Jesus saw Nathanael coming toward him and said, "Behold, an Israelite indeed in whom there is no deceit." Nathanael said to him, "How do you know me?" Jesus answered him, "Before Philip called you, when you were under the fig tree, I saw you." Nathanael answered him, "Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel." This is an interesting response, isn't it? First of all, he's skeptical and doesn't want to believe in Jesus, but at the mention of a fig tree, he does a 180 and starts believing that Jesus is the Son of God. What does this mean? Famed preacher Charles Spurgeon has some comments that are interesting to our understanding of this passage. What was Nathanael doing under the fig tree, according to our best surmise? This may have been a shadowy fig tree under which Nathanael was accustomed to offer his devotions, and perhaps just before Philip came to him, he may have been engaged in personal and solitary confession of sin. He had looked round the garden and fastened the gate so that none might come in, and he had poured into the ear of his God some very tender confession under the fig tree shade. When Christ said to him, "When thou wast under the fig tree," it brought to his recollection how he pondered out his broken and contrite spirit and confessed sins unknown to all but God. That confession, it may be, the very look of Christ brought back to his remembrance, and the words and look together seemed to say, "I know your secret burden, and the peace you found in rolling it upon the Lord." He felt, therefore, that Jesus must be Israel's God. The term fig tree, according to the culture of his day, also had messianic connotations, and so it could be that he was under the fig tree praying for the long-awaited Messiah. That Jesus was presented to him right after he was praying for the Messiah's coming under the fig tree, and the fact that Jesus himself knew where he was praying about it could have been enough to satisfy his skepticism. Jesus answered him, "Because I said to you, I saw you under the fig tree, do you believe? You will see greater things than these." And he said to him, "Truly, truly, I say to you, you will see heaven opened and the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man." The truth is, we're all a little bit like Nathanael, aren't we? We see some things as normal and other things as abnormal. We see some things as desirable and other things as undesirable. We want to be associated with things that we see as good, and we want to disassociate ourselves from things that we see as bad. Now, this develops a sense of prejudice in all of us, right? Because we have this information and we use it throughout the day to make snap judgments on things that we deem normal or weird so that we can carry on with our life without having to ponder deeply every single situation and interaction in our life. But this year, all of that has been thrown in our face. People who we thought we saw eye to eye with have disappointed us. People who we thought we could trust betrayed us. People who should have been protecting us failed to do so. Normal activities now are being seen as the most dangerous, and once abnormal behavior is now being called normal and good. Our expectations about reality have been shattered, and now we're left picking up the pieces. I bet Nathanael felt the same way, seeing his Messiah upon the cross. He knew that this was the Son of God. He knew that he was going to save them from the Romans. And he knew this because Jesus knew into his heart like no man could. But here he was, on the cross, dead, along with Nathanael's hopes and dreams. And for 3 days, Nathanael had to sulk and stew and try to pick up the pieces of his life. In fact, he gave up so much on ministry that he, along with the other fishermen, went back to their fishing instead. We read in John 21, verses 1 through 12, that Simon Peter, Thomas, called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 others of his disciples were together. Simon Peter said to them, "I'm going fishing." And they said to him, "We will go with you." They went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Just as day was breaking, Jesus stood on the shore, yet the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to them, "Do you have any fish?" They answered him, "No." He said to them, "Cast the net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some." So they cast it, and now they were not able to haul it in because of the quantity of fish. Now, as a fisherman, there might be days that you catch very little fish. There might be days that you catch many fish. But I think probably never will you catch absolutely no fish and then just throw your net in a different spot on the other side of the boat and catch all of the fish all at once. This was enough of a miracle for the disciples to do a double take, and they realized instantly that this was no stranger on the beach. This was Jesus. That disciple whom Jesus loved, who would be John, therefore said to Peter, "It is the Lord." When Simon Peter had heard that it was the Lord, he put on his outer garment, for he was stripped for work, and threw himself into the sea. The other disciples came in the boat, dragging the net full of fish, for they were not far from the land, but about 100 yards off. When they got on land, they saw a charcoal fire in place, with fish laid out on it and bread. Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish that you have just caught." So Simon Peter went aboard and hauled the net ashore full of large fish, 153 of them. And although there were so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." Now none of the disciples dared to ask him, "Who are you?" They knew it was the Lord. Nathanael then realized that his understanding of reality fell short. He had indeed not lost Jesus. In fact, this man from Nazareth was the Messiah after all, just like he thought. But the Messiah didn't wear a crown. He wasn't a powerful warlord. It was this humble man from this humble town who died a criminal's death, and yet he was there among them. Jesus was an ordinary Messiah in the fact that he didn't summon a great army. He didn't command a legion of visible angels. He didn't even try to get off the cross when he was up there. He died willingly for our sins so that we could be forgiven and live eternally in heaven with him. But that's what makes Jesus so abnormal, isn't it? Because on one hand, he's so completely human and so normal that we wouldn't suspect a thing. But on the other hand, he's completely God. And we are told in the same book at the beginning in John 1 verse 3, all things were made through Jesus, and without him, not anything was made that was made. This ordinary person who died and yet lives is the same one who created all things at the beginning of Genesis. He's the same deliverer God who brought people out of Egypt and brought them to Mount Sinai, where they were terrified of the power that he displayed at the top of the mountain. This is the same powerful God who gave them the promised land, Canaan, but then also took it away when they acted terribly, who redeemed his people time and time again, who worked with a boy named David in an ordinary field that could have been anywhere. It could have been in Indiana, but he worked with him to defeat this powerful giant warrior, who raises his friends from the dead, who in heaven commands a heavenly host, who died and yet lives, so the very ideas of sin and death and suffering can be defeated and thrown into the lake of fire to be heard from no more. When we think things are normal, think again, because God has been using utterly normal and ordinary and boring things for thousands of years to yield the most amazing miracles. Truly, nothing is normal. In fact, if anything is normal, it's our God, who the Bible tells us will never change in his steadfastness, his love, his justice, and his mercy. And even now, in the year 2020, as the world is looking for a new normal, we need to realize that nothing about our situation has ever been normal, because we live in a reality of sin. We live in brokenness, and nothing can return to the normal that God designed us to be until Jesus comes back and takes us to be with him in eternity. If I can look at the city of Nazareth with my own eyes and think this place is normal, all I have to realize is, like Nathanael, that this place is where God himself grew from a baby to a man and was prepared as the only sacrifice once and for all to forgive the sins of the entire world. That this place that seems so normal is in fact full of such a large miracle. It's the only miracle that even matters in the history of everything. And as I look around at the world around us, at America, at Wisconsin, or wherever it is that you live, I look around and it looks ordinary, but I have to wonder, what miracle is God preparing in this place, in this time? As we try to pick up the pieces of our lives that have been shattered by this pandemic, we need to realize, again, like Nathanael, that our Savior still lives. That when we feel like all is lost, Jesus has won. When we feel the most abandoned, we need to remember that he promises never to leave us or forsake us, and that we will see our Savior again. And so as we claim these promises, we say, "Come soon, Lord Jesus." Help us to keep our eyes fixed on you and to be steadfast and patient for your second coming. May we always walk with you like Joseph. May we have hope in your healing and resurrection like Martha. May we continually praise your name like Job. And may we, like Naomi, see bitterness turned to joy. And like Nathanael, may we have our expectations shattered in the best way possible. May we see you, Jesus, and may we see you soon.